So our next speaker is actually joining us online. So I'd like to welcome Katie McRobert, who's the General Manager for the Australian Farm Institute. Sustainable business. She's worked with a number of different sectors, Rabobank, Farm Online. She won the Most Innovative Business Project Award with her 2020 MBA Australasia Graduate Management Awards, and she's co-authored several landmark reports on climate change. So she's going to share with us today online about the pathways and opportunities with Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework. So we're going to be crossing now to Katie.
Thank you, everyone. Now I'm stuck on a little laptop. I'm away from home this week, and I know that everything is a little bit difficult to see. So now that I've put the screen up, I can't see what's going on. I can't see you guys. If someone could just give me a shout out and say, yes, you can see that, or no, you can't. So
You, Katie.
All good? I'm going to jump in and proceed. So thanks very much for the introduction, Karen, and thanks for having us here today. So we're going to talk about developing a sustainability framework for Australian agriculture, and I've got a little note up there saying yes, all of it. Apologies that we've got the narrow screen to this presentation. I'll explain why as we go through, and I will just jump on in and we'll tell you a little bit, just for those who don't know, about the Australian Farm Institute. Institute sounds like a big building in some nice landscape grounds somewhere. That's not us at all. We are in fact a very small, independent, not-for-profit with a regionally distributed team. And our funding for the Farm Institute comes from research work and memberships, just so you know where we're coming from. We don't have any dog in the fight. We don't have any horse in the race. We are trying to do the most independent work we possibly can. So before I dive too far into presenting the actual framework itself, I want to tell everyone that the framework itself you can download from the AFI's website, which you can see at the top there. You can go to farminstitute.org.au and click on that research tab that I've just circled. And that way you can download the framework and have a look yourself. It will show you things like this, which are very detailed. And I know it will be very difficult for you to see whether you're watching at home on Zoom or whether you're in the room and trying to look at what I've squished onto this very small screen here. But these are the kinds of things that you'll be able to see in more detail if you go up here to this website. But let's jump.
See your screen. So we're just seeing you and you look lovely, but we can't see your PowerPoint.
I have to escape and go back. I did all of that work too. Let me go back through. How about we share this one? And tell me if that's working as.
Very good. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, everything I said, I'm not going to go back over again, but about the AFI, you heard me say that we're a small team. And there we go. The AFI's website hosts all this information that I'm about to dump on you in one go. And I think we're about to put that up on the conference website after this as well. So please do go through and have a look so that when I get to slides like this, which are quite difficult for you to read in whichever situation you're in, you can go back and look through at your leisure and understand what it was I was rabbiting on about for all of this time. So a little bit about the AASF, or Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework. It is government-funded project work. The government's recognised the need to support industry with the tools to build a sustainable future with the $34 million agricultural stewardship package announced in 2019's budget to help Australian farmers improve management practices and to reward farmers for their efforts in sustainability. Within that package, $4 million has been provided to the Agricultural Sustainability Framework Development, which has been managed by the National Farmers Federation. And out of that, NFF has tasked AFI with building the framework itself. So if we look at the project process, and I know this is probably a little boring, but it's important to know where it all fits in the greater scheme of things. There was some work in 2020, phase 1 design work, where AFI actually took on a research project funded by the Department of Agriculture, Federal Department, looking at a biodiversity certification scheme. And what they wanted was the rationale behind the scheme and what it should look like and why we should build it. We talked to more than 500 stakeholders in agriculture and in natural resource management around the country over a period of more than 6 months, and came back with the somewhat unfortunate answer for the department that we didn't think a biodiversity certification was particularly viable at that time. It was mostly about the certification. Everybody wants to improve biodiversity. Everyone can see value in that. But another certification scheme was really just not a popular option And so one of our recommendations at the end of the report, which is also available online if you're interested in some very interesting bedtime reading, was that we're more likely to get better outcomes, the kind of outcomes that the department was looking for, by building an overarching framework which could bring together all of the existing work that's already going on and also give guidance to people who are trying to develop these kinds of schemes and initiatives in the future so that there's consistency moving forward. So from that report, then the recommendation to build this overarching framework was taken up, and NFF has now got 6 elements, is the way they describe them, but 6 project teams working on the AASF. AFI is building the framework itself. KPMG is giving us input into the commercial drivers and appetite. CSIRO are looking at metrics and harmonisation. Schuster Consulting is looking at the existing frameworks and where those align and don't align with what we're building and giving us a lot of really good feedback there. KG2 is a surveying company that's doing some communications and engagement work and testing the appetite amongst the producer community. And Aether Consulting is looking at some legal and taxation issues to make sure that the obstacles to taking these kinds of frameworks up are really clearly identified. Then there's a further phase once all of this is wrapped up, which is going hopefully by Feb next year. There'll be a pilot phase to actually put the framework into practice and see how it runs. Really a couple of important notes down the bottom there, what the AASF will and won't do. It will harmonise existing schemes and identify those high-level principles and goals that we're aiming for. It won't set specific industry targets, and it won't replace any of those existing schemes and frameworks. This is a really busy little slide here. So this is more for me to be able to know what I'm telling you. I don't expect you to try and read this, so please don't squint too hard. I'll just run through quickly how this relates to different things that are going on at the same time, because I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of these other projects, and it's nice to know where the consistency comes in. So although we said that we didn't think a biodiversity certification scheme was a terrific idea, the department are very set on that. They really, really want to see it happen, and they've tasked ANU with a whole lot of work in that area. So there's the carbon and biodiversity pilot, which I think has just kicked off a month or two ago. ANU are also building a biodiversity trading platform, and we really hope that does succeed. We would love to see it succeed. Just that the feedback that we were getting was that the producers did not want to see any more certification layers. So if it succeeds, that would be a good result. We'll see how it all goes. And we are trying to keep in contact with that ANU team as much as possible to make sure that we're still aligning and we're aiming for the same goals. It is an important point, though, too, that a lot of those projects commissioned under the stewardship package are targeted towards carbon capture and to biodiversity improvement. AASF project is different because we are looking at spanning all of agriculture, which is obviously not an easy ask, and that we're looking at environmental, social and governance sustainability elements, not just carbon capture and just biodiversity, as big as those are in their own rights. Now, underneath there's a whole lot of words that I already explained on the previous slide about how all the different elements work together, but the short story is AFI started building this framework at the start of this year, and we've been in constant communication with these other elements down the side there, the financial incentives, the industry program evaluation, data alignment, communication engagement, legal and policy analysis, and we're back and forth with them constantly to make sure that what we're building is refined and improved as we go through. And when we get to the next slide, something that's really important also to keep in mind is, although we are working towards a final deliverable product for this project, it certainly won't be a static document. It's never going to be something that sits untouched. It will have to be constantly reviewed and refreshed to make sure that it's responsive to what's happening in markets, in the agricultural production systems, in regulation. All of those things are going to be constantly changing, and the AASF will need to be responsive to those as well. So what we're going to be delivering is the first final version, not the be all and end all. So the purpose statement for the AASF is that it will communicate the sustainability status and goals of the industry to markets and to the community. It's a voluntary framework. It's not about compliance. It's about consistency. It's intended that there be no additional cost to producers for participation. There are a lot of schemes out there already that people are already participating in, industry-led schemes, private certification schemes, market-led schemes. This is supposed to bring those things together and reduce some of the existing duplication, not add an extra layer on top. The principles and criteria in this framework are quite high level, and you'll see that as we go through the framework itself. There has been a bit of pushback from people in stakeholder roundtables that it's too high level. We can have that discussion in the Q&A afterwards, but I will say that it's deliberately high level because it's as we go down through the framework from the top down into those indicators and metrics at the bottom, where the detail and the actual goals should be, not at the high level, because otherwise you've locked people into something that may or may not be achievable. The themes and categories that we'll go through are descriptive, not prescriptive. So if you see something in one theme that you think belongs in another, you're probably right. It's impossible to draw lines between these things. As you all know, working in agriculture and natural resource management, there is no line. Everything relates to everything else. Everything is intertwined with something else, but we just needed some way to at least direct people through the framework as we go through. I think I've already pulled out my favorite line, that it's designed to enforce not to enforce compliance, but to ensure consistency. And really important to note that it's been informed by and aligned with relevant global standards because, as Rich pointed out, about the 69 largest economies being companies, not countries, our global market is really a very important focus for this particular framework. I'm just going to open the chat up and make sure no one's saying that they can't see anything. That's great. And yes, I am aware that too many words, you can't possibly see them. I'm just going to talk you through them, so don't try and read them all as we go. National Farmers Federation has developed this diagram to try and explain how everything fits together. I'll leave you to go and look at that in your own time because there are a lot of words in there. There's really a lot of words in there. I think maybe a few too many. But if we have a look at the framework itself, this is where we get down to the meat on the bones. So we've got 3 primary themes, we've got 13 categories, and we've got 17 principles. Those themes of environmental stewardship, of people and community, and economic resilience are designed to fall under a roughly an ESG framework, environmental, social and governance framework, which ties in with the reporting, as Rich mentioned earlier in his presentation too. Banks and finance, the finance sector, they're really interested in this kind of stuff. And so we're trying to use a framework that relates closely to what they're doing with their reporting, but the language that we've used is based on sustainability frameworks because sustainability language is quite different to reporting and accounting language. So those 13 categories, again, they're meant to just direct people in the right way. They're not meant to be a hard line. This is the only place you will find a criteria or a principle that relates. But to run through those, the categories under the environmental stewardship are greenhouse gases and air, soil and landscapes, biodiversity, water, materials, and energy. Underneath each of the categories, then we've got a list of principles we'll go through as I dive a bit deeper. Under people and community, we have human health, safety and well-being. We have livelihoods, rights, equity and diversity, social contribution, and animal well-being, which we have put under people and community because it's something that people are responsible for. Economic resilience covers good governance, fair trading and biosecurity. And then if we look underneath those principles, rather than me read all those out, what I might do is dive into the framework itself. But something I'd like to point out is that there are these little notes all the way through. If you do go to the AFI's website and download this yourself or to the conference website after this, there's all these little kind of indicator things like this. And if you click on those, it will take you to a different slide and you can see a little bit more background and understand it. And then there's these little icons that will take you back to different parts of the presentation so that you can pop up at a different spot wherever you go. Hopefully that will be helpful and not, there's a lot of zooming in and out, but we'll see how we go. So I'm going to run you through the environmental stewardship theme, just to have a bit of a look at how all of this works. So the purpose of this theme is to identify the industry's actions, ambitions and status on sustainable environmental stewardship. And if we dive in and have a bit of a look there at the categories, we can see that there are principles under each of those that say anthropogenic GHG emissions are limited to mitigate climate change, adverse impacts to air quality are minimised, soil health and functionality are preserved, landform degradation is mitigated, biodiverse ecological communities are protected, water resources are used responsibly, and waste is minimised to safeguard our finite stocks of raw materials. But if you go back and have a look at those, then obviously we've got more layers here as we go down through. So when you click on the principles, you'll still see it up the top here so you know where you are. But the principle of anthropogenic emissions limiting climate change then has criteria underneath. So this is probably a good point for me to point out that we've used the principles and criteria and indicators structure very deliberately because it reflects most of the leading major global initiatives, standards and frameworks that we have looked at in our incredibly intensive and time-consuming reviews. Principles are outcomes. They're the things we want to see happen. Criteria are things we need to do to make sure those things happen. So the outcome is we want to limit GHG emissions to mitigate climate change. That's the ideal state that we want to get to. And in order for us to get to that ideal state, we need to reduce our emissions upstream, on-farm and post-farm gate. This is also a good one to land on because I would like to point out that this is quite a detailed framework already, and we haven't actually finished writing it all. There's still more detail to put in there. But it's clearly not going to be that every single principle and criteria is material or relevant to every single producer or participant in the supply chain. But what we need to do is clarify that there are points within that supply chain that different people and different participants have areas of responsibility or areas of influence that they can address. So much like the Sustainability Development Goals developed by the UN, there's 17 of those Sustainable Development Goals. Not every single one of them is your personal responsibility, but there are areas within those SDGs that you can say, well, this is material to me on my farm or in my business or in my community. This is something I can have an impact on, and that's where I'm going to focus my effort and energies, and that's what I'm going to report on. And this would be a similar framework. We would like to see that as many of these as possible apply across the agricultural sector in Australia, but we're aware that not all of them will be directly relevant or directly within your control. So obviously, upstream emissions, post-farm gate emissions, if you're on the dairy, that's not something that's necessarily your responsibility. And as we look through them as well, these are examples of indicators. These are not the specific indicators that we are setting out because the AASF at this point is directing people to existing indicators already identified in sustainability schemes or programs or certification schemes. If you'd like to see how those align with the things that we've been looking on, there's these little puzzle pieces here that you can click on, and we get a swipe across, and there's a list here of the SDGs, of the relevant ISO, of the Montreal process information, Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, the SAPA, which is the Sustainability Assessment for Food and Agriculture, led by the FAO. And we've started making a list. This is definitely not comprehensive. If you don't see your industry up there, don't think that means you're not represented. It just means we haven't finished the list yet. Where these particular principles are either referred to or reflective of existing schemes. And all of these have links through to the particular, so you can go to the MyBMP, you can go to the Beef Sustainability Framework to see where it all ties in together. That's a lot of information. I'm going to go through and just look at a couple more of them, and then I will wrap up so that we can have some questions. Another couple that I wanted to show you in particular. There's been a lot of change between version 1 and version 2. So part of our project scope is to basically do this in 3 iterations. Version 1 was similar in structure, but much messier, and there was a lot more in it. This probably looks very busy to all of you, but we've actually cut down a lot of the information that we had in version 1, which was that, for example, under soil health, we'd gone through and detailed exactly what soil health should look like, what the criteria were that were addressing soil health. We've taken that back up a level, and we've said, look, it's really important that soil health and functionality are preserved. That's a sustainability goal. And the criteria are that soils can support agricultural productivity, provide beneficial environmental services, and that they have that structural integrity and support biodiversity. Now, as I'm sure everyone in the room is well aware, of course, that biodiversity in soils is a whole topic of its own. It could have its own framework, which people could spend, I'm sure, years working on. What we're trying to do is make sure that this is what we're capturing as an ideal state, and then we go through in the indicators and actually detail what that's going to look like. Again, these are just examples. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does align with a whole lot of different frameworks, domestic and international. And these, again, are examples, not the be all and end all. So just to... Second theme, people and communities. The principles under this particular theme are that safe goods and services are produced for public consumption, safe working environments are provided for employees, and that we provide fair access to a decent livelihood. we don't tolerate any form of discrimination, we make a positive contribution to society, and that our farmed animals are given the best care for the whole of life. Again, diving in on that, criteria for best care is that on-farm husbandry is the best it can be. Best practices are different. It's a tricky term, best practice, and we might have that conversation in the Q&A afterwards. We're ensuring safe transportation and humane processing methods, and then we're looking at those sorts of examples that, of course, align very closely with international and domestic frameworks. Work in progress, means that we're still collating the list, not that we can't find the information. There's just so much of it. It was difficult for us all to get it all into this particular deadline. If we have a look then at the economic resilience theme, the categories under the theme are good governance, fair trading and biosecurity. Industry participants behave ethically and respect the rule of law, and risks are assessed, managed and mitigated. Something that I really wanted to look at in this one, some of the environmental ones are about improvement and about ideal states, whereas some of the governance ones are much more about things that we would already do as a matter of course in Australian farms. But the reason we've made sure that they're included here, with some very strong feedback from the industry and from the supply chain and from people we've talked to internationally, Australians do things differently to a lot of our other trading partners, and it's really important to call that out in a sustainability framework. So if you look at global sustainability frameworks, they all include things about no slavery and no bribery, things that we wouldn't even think to include because it's just not part of our business life. But it is something that sets Australian agriculture apart from some of our competitors. So we wanted to make sure that was highlighted within the sustainability framework, and I would hope that everyone in the room already gets a tick on all of these things already, that they're all over their biosecurity management, that they're behaving as ethically as they possibly can. But it's important to include them for those reasons. There are some interesting criteria underneath here, though, that have come again from examples of mostly of global frameworks, but it might be interesting to hear some feedback on those. Compliance with laws, fair access to participate equally in markets is a nice tricky one that we'll throw to the ACCC. We're not going to try and solve that at the AFI. Zero tolerance for bribery and corruption. Risk management is about industry level scenario planning, but also about individuals within the industry developing and reviewing their own risk management plans. And there's also a call out here for making sure that innovation and infrastructure are well resourced and equitably shared. Transparency and accountability are really important. It's not, when we say product provenance information is readily available, we're not saying that everyone needs to go and build a blockchain or participate in some sort of blockchain exchange platform. It's just making sure that that transparency is not at all compromised. So if there is a product problem, that things can be traced easily back through to its point of production, and that there is accountability through the supply chain, which I think we can't really argue with in Australia, that we have a fairly good system for that. It could always stand some improvement. And look, if we could come up with a lovely blockchain solution in 2022, I'd be happy to endorse that, but not that we're saying technology is the only way to do that. The second one is somewhat problematic for some people. We've had a bit of feedback on that in the roundtable discussions we've been having. Eliminating information asymmetry in the supply chain is something that does come up a lot in global frameworks, because it's about just making sure that everybody's on a level playing field, that we've got fairness in our agricultural supply chains. And this one here I've put in almost specifically for Richard Eckhard, just to make him happy. Harmonising those supply chain carbon footprint accounting systems is really important to make sure that when you're talking about accountability in this supply chain, you're all talking about the same thing. Biosecurity is fairly self-evident, and I do know that we're starting to run out of time, so I will just probably go back to the home screen. And I'm just checking the chat while I'm going. There we go. That's nothing I need to worry about there. One thing I did want to go to, if I can find it here again. Just 1 second. I've got to remember how to drive my own spreadsheet. No, PowerPoint. What is this? There's a lot going on. I've lost my home. That's all right. There's a page right at the end that I was going to take you to, which now I can't seem to get back to. There we go. If we just zip right back to this one here, just to finish up on why we've chosen these terms and why we've chosen this particular structure, and I did talk about that at the start about reflecting the ESG reporting, but using sustainability language. We've gone through an enormous number of global and domestic sustainability frameworks, initiatives, certifications, all of these different things. We're not trying to copy those. We don't want it to be just a direct cut and paste from those, but it is important that we reflect those as strongly as we can so that people who are picking up the framework for the first time understand what it is they're seeing and that it has some sort of resonance with the things that they're expecting to look for. One of the other things that the framework is really aiming to do is avoid greenwashing, but also avoid gold plating. So to use an example, there are certification schemes out there that you can participate in that will either give you a tick without even checking your accounting, or they'll be so onerous and so overdone that you're paying too much to participate in the scheme without actually getting that. Sorry, I just had a little noise and making sure I haven't dropped out. No, I can still see people. That's good. And I lost my train of thought. In any case, there's a whole lot of different things that these relate to. And again, that's very small language there on the screen. So we're talking about the FAO, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials, the Global Reporting Initiative's agriculture-specific standard, the World Benchmarking Alliance for Food and Agriculture, the Sustainable Development Goals. We've looked extensively at the beef sustainability framework, at dairy, at wine, behind Australian grains, at cotton BMP and at smart cane BMP as well. And we're looking through more of those as we go through, just to make sure that we're reflecting what the industry is trying to do, but we're also making it aspirational, that we're trying to set some goalposts that we can all aim for at the same time. I think I've run out of chat, so I will stop there, and if I stop sharing, we'll go over to questions.
That's great.